before we talk about the drivers themselves, can you tell us a little bit about these machines? How complex is an F1 car?
Yeah, so I think the F1 cars, in the sense, the way it's a power unit era now. So it's all been about that technology. You've got the MGK units, the deployment, the battery packs. You've got the internal combustion engine elements as well as the power. So the power unit's the overall umbrella. So really, really complex cars that create a huge amount of brake horsepower out of a very small engine, 1.6 litre internal combustion engine. They're producing sort of 1,000 brake horsepower. So very, very impressive with how they sort of get that delivered. And the tech is trying to be as road relevant as possible, but we are entering an era now where electric technology is building, and so Formula One's looking hard to make itself as carbon neutral as possible, carbon neutral fuel, that kind of stuff. So it's going to be interesting where we go. I mean, they've obviously published the new engine regs for 2026, but yeah, it's going to be an interesting direction in terms of how we go. I mean, that's the sort of power unit element. In terms of how the downforce is created, we've just had a rule change, so they've gone back to ground effects. So that's created challenges in itself, but it's got rid of all of the what I call litter that you saw in and around the front of the car, or the tuning vanes, or the different aerodynamic aids that were very much like shark teeth absolutely everywhere. We've sort of got rid of that now and gone back to, yes, you create a huge amount of load from the front and the rear wing and the air going over the top of the car, but actually it all comes from the diffuser and the floor and the ground effects. And so that's been a rule change that's slightly spiced up the running order, although we got Red Bull back at the front again. But Ferrari looked really good at the beginning of the year. They certainly have a very good car over a lap, but the way the cars create downforce now, that's through ground effects that we haven't seen in Formula One for a good couple of decades.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it definitely goes to show when they're making those corners, that's why it looks so unnatural when the cars are cornering, because there's so much of that downforce forcing them into the ground. Yeah, that's so crazy.
Huge amounts. I mean, it's, they produce huge amounts of downforce. I mean, it's frightening. And wow, when you're in those corners, the G-force on the driver, I mean, you're 5.5 Gs under braking, you're 3.5 Gs through the corner. So that in itself, that's five tons of downforce on the car. So that they could at 100 miles an hour drive, 150 mile an hour drive upside down. If you could actually get the car onto the roof, that's how much downforce they would stick to the roof.
Wow, that's incredible. Wow. So one of your coworkers, Sam, is one of my favorites to include because he explains all the tech. You guys have great interactions. I really love. What's that?
I was going to say, when you asked me the tech question, you needed him to answer.
We need him. Well, and he does such a great job, not only during the show explaining what's going on, but also the features like Tech Tuesday, where it explains like the tire sensors or the aerodynamics and all of these things. It makes it so awesome to kind of follow along. And he'll talk about these upgrade packages that they'll bring to the cars in a certain week. So as the weeks are going, you're trying to improve your car. You're learning all the time about how it's performing in different conditions. And you start learning about, wow, this team is bringing this crazy upgrade package. And you're like, well, what's this upgrade package? And it's like a little carbon flange here and like a little change in the mirror curvature there. Like that's a major upgrade package, like minute little details.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's step by step. I mean, obviously you develop a car and they have incredible software for simulation, and then you've got the wind tunnel. There's no substitute for the wind tunnel, because what the numbers say in the simulation doesn't always correlate to what you see in the wind tunnel. And then what you see in the wind tunnel doesn't necessarily correlate to what you see on the racetrack as well, because you've got to marry aero grip up with mechanical grip, because obviously we talked about the aero downforce. You've got the mechanical grip as well, which are the torsion bars, the dampers, that kind of stuff, working on contact patches with the tires, and so forth. I mean, it's really, really complex. That's why they have so much data in terms of the engineers trying to marry their ideology and what the data says to the real. But yeah, Sam does a wonderful job in explaining it. And then you've got, you know, hundreds of people at the factories just working on hundredths of a second. If they can find a tenth, that's such a huge breakthrough. And we've got the cost cap now, but they'll spend millions and millions of pounds trying to develop a tenth of a second, because, you know, a tenth or two, that can be the difference between going out in Q3 or getting through to Q1. And that's, you know, very, very, you know, well, that's the difference between world championship points or no points.
Yeah, that's right. So for the listener, with the qualifying, you're basically trying to get your best time, and there's 3 different ranges where they're eliminating drivers in the first 2, and then the last 10 get set by your position. And that comes down to hundreds, thousands of seconds. It is very, very close. And you described what the start is like. All the cars are at a standstill. They go as full gas as they possibly can into that first corner, but that's where all the traffic is. That's where you're going to have cars like side by side, and that's where all the chaos is. And so if you're one place back, you know, because you're a tenth slower in the qualifying, and now that puts you into more danger, or that slows you up because you get that effect through the corners, that's a huge difference. That's a difference between, you know, the top 10 drivers that score points or even making it onto the podium or not. It makes a big difference.
Definitely. And you know, you don't want to qualify out of position because you're not used to racing in and around that area of the grid. You're not used to racing certain individuals that you'll be around. And it's where the melee is. It's where all of the concertina effect and the cars meet, vying for 1 or 2 lines or small areas of tarmac. And, you know, the laws of physics and the you know, and so forth means that not everyone can get through, so that the likelihood of contact is very real. And then you've done all of that work, the team have put all of that work in, and you might have traveled 500 meters and you're out on the spot, which is really difficult to take as a team boss, because they've got to pay for it. As an engineer, as a mechanic, you might have pulled an all-nighter, and then as the driver, you've got your own personal disappointment and the weight of the world on your shoulders, because you've got to trudge back to the garage and explain to everyone what went wrong.
Yeah, we saw that literally at, I believe it was Spa, and you saw that shot of Lewis Hamilton walking down some like back alley to get back to the garage and explain what happened. So this is a good segue. Let's talk about the drivers, and let's talk about the physical demands. What kind of physical demands? You mentioned G-forces. What kind of shape do these guys have to be in?
Yeah, so racing drivers are predominantly quite small, although the TV makes them look quite large. You want to be under 70 kilos. So anything sort of from like 62 kilos up, which means that you've got to be really efficient with your strength, because you want to have a huge amount of sort of strength / enduro in certain muscle groups. But then you don't want to have muscle where you don't need it, because that's going to be excess weight, right? So drivers will tend to have big backs, no chest, like big triceps, no biceps, you know, huge forearms, huge necks, and the sort of the G's. I mean, every time you hit the brake pedal, it's 1.5 bar. So you're looking at anything up to sort of 60 kilos, 65 kilos to 100 kilos of brake pedal pressure. So we had rugby players, which is your equivalent's football. We had rugby players come into the simulator, and when they first hit the brake, because the brake pedal doesn't travel very far, it feels as though it's not traveling at all. It's that solid. And when you hit it, they weren't braking, because they were hitting it hard, but they weren't hitting it hard enough. And I'd say to them, no, you don't understand. Think your beautiful pet dog or whatever it is has just walked out in front of the car, and you're going to nail that brake pedal with all your might. You're going to do everything you can. You're going to put everything into hitting that brake pedal, and then they'll do it. It's like bang, they'll do it. And then you're like, right, now you need to simulate that every single time you brake, and we're going to do it for like 75 laps in extreme heat. And so every time you brake, it's 65 to 100 kilos through your left leg. Then Formula 1 has power steering, but if we look at IndyCar, you're looking at about 30 kilos through the wheel. And also, if you're looking at 3.5 G through the corners in Formula One, anything up to sort of 25 kilos and above on your neck. So if you're going around a right-hand corner, you're going to have all of the force on your shoulders and then 25 kilos pushing your head. And then you've got to come out of that and then hit the brake pedal for like 100 kilos. And then you've got to try and right yourself, brace yourself in the car, use all your obliques. Your glutes get so sore because you're trying to hold your legs up in the car, your hip flexors. I mean, Nick de Vries, who did his debut race for Williams, after the race, he just said, "I'm done. Like I won't repeat the expletive," but he just said, "My shoulders." He just came on the radio saying, "I'm done."
I was going to bring that up. Actually, this is a pro driver. This guy drives. He has a history of driving Formula 2. Very last minute, he gets called into this car. He's got to race for Albon, who had appendicitis. So he's got to do practice. He's got to qualify. Then he's got to do the race, which is way longer than what he's used to. And the radio commentary was like, "My shoulders are dead. Like I have no shoulders." Didn't they have to Didn't they have to get him out of the car?
Yeah, and they'll get him out of the car and he'll be in a bad way. When they go to Singapore next time up, the heat there is phenomenal. So you'll see drivers on drips after the race, pre-race, that kind of thing. There was a Formula 2 driver a couple of years ago that did his debut F2 race there, and he just literally came on the radio after the race and said, "Call me an ambulance," because he was just finished. And you just really struggle to explain how physical it is, especially in the heat. So if you're thinking 32 degrees, 34 degrees air temperature in the car, that's going to be pushing 40 degrees because of all the heat and the engine soak and the heat soak and everything like that around you. Then you are sitting in Nomex trousers, Nomex polo neck, and then you've got a triple layer Nomex suit over the top of you, which is like wearing a tracksuit to go skiing in or something like that. Then you've got your gloves, your balaclava, your helmet, and although you've got your head out the car, that's an aerodynamicist nightmare. So none of the airflow is ever directed into that hole because it would just go in and then come out. And you want the airflow going as cleanly over the car as possible. So you'll see the drivers in Singapore putting their visor up and trying to sit out of the car in the pit lane as they trundle down the pit lane just to try and get some airflow. So you're imagine over 40 degrees with all of that kit on, no drink, no nothing for 2 hours in extreme, your average heart rate is going to be 150. So you're working average heart rate 150 and over 40 degrees with no drink, with all that core body temperature, because they've got the thermometers, you're pushing 40 degrees. Now, if you had a temperature of 40 degrees, you go to hospital. So they're right on the cusp of what's humanly possible. And it's so hard. I know some of you will say that I've seen them have a drink. Well, it's not really a drink because it turns into a cup of tea after about 10 minutes because it's so hot everywhere. So all you use that for, because it's boiling hot after about 20 minutes, is to just wet your mouth. Otherwise your tongue just sticks to the roof of your mouth. So yeah, it's really physical. It's horrible. And you'll get drivers, they won't say this on the media or pre-race because they don't admit weakness to anyone else. But, over the years, traveling to Singapore and stuff like that, after the practice sessions, drivers will speak to friends or trusted people in their circle and think, I don't think I can do this. Wow. I think I've got this in the locker. And it's that physical. It's really hard.
That's crazy. Okay, so you mentioned the people's necks, and you definitely got a sense of that, especially in the Netflix series when you see the drivers out of the car a lot. All of them have slightly different body types, but their face and neck is the same width. Like to just hold your head up in those kind of G-forces would require that for sure. And then we'll link to this in the show notes. There's a great video on YouTube. I think it's 14 or 15 minutes long, and it's called "Regular Guy Drives a Formula 1 Car." And this guy gets the opportunity to drive, I think it was in France. It was a 2012 car that he got to drive. And they kind of train you all day, and then you practice for like 3 laps. And so as he's preparing, fit dude, he drove a little bit in kart, same as you. And, fit dude, they put him in and they say like, okay, apply the brakes. So he pushes on the brakes, and they're like, no, like apply the brakes. So he pushes down, and they say, no, like you don't understand, like you need to apply the brakes. And he does, and they go back and say, okay, well, that was about 60%.
Yeah.
And he goes out and takes this lap, and he sees his braking zone, and so he hits the brakes. His head snaps forward. He could barely like lift his head to see the corner, which he was able to get around. But they told him afterwards he was applying about 40% of the braking power.
Yeah, definitely. If you could superimpose Max Verstappen's talent into you, for example, and put you in the car, you just wouldn't be able to do a lap. You just wouldn't be able. A fit person, you just don't have the strength. I mean, I can't begin to tell you, when you hit the brakes for the first time, is 5 times the weight, and you got the helmet on and everything, and it'll bang your chin on your chest. That's it. You're done. And when your neck starts to go, you're trying to hold your head up with your eyeballs. It sounds ridiculous, but you're like, oh, like straining away, trying to hold your head up with the eyeballs. It's got a bit better with the hands device now, because you can tighten the hands device. You're not meant to, but it gives you a way out. Whereas when we didn't have the hands device, when your neck went, that was it. Because literally you get into the corner and your head will fall over. And there's nothing you can do. Once that muscle, I think it's sternocleidomastoid or something like that, once that goes, you're done. And that would be day done. And, you know, whether or not you're a young driver doing F3 or moving up to 3000 as it was then, or World Series or GP2, you'd regularly go and do a 2-day test. And you'd do the first day, done. You try and do the morning of the second day, and you pot around, do a bit, and then that's it. You just call it a day, because you just can't do the 2 days.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the physical side. I would love to talk about the mental side. And what is the driver doing during the race? What things are they considering besides just, throttle, brake, and steer?
Yeah, so the driver's mind is very active, because you have a huge amount of information that you need to digest, and that's not just what's rushing past your sensories. So your eyes or whatever it is, or what you're feeling through your backside or whatever. It's all of the information around fuel mileage. If it's IndyCar, you've got to work your tools, so you'll be changing the roll bar, brake bias, weight jacker, that kind of stuff. In Formula 1, they're regularly changing the brake bias and working through the different engine modes, and the engineers are always in their ears. So the amount of information that you've got to digest and make really quick decisions and operate on is vast. And for the vast majority of human beings, just being able to operate at that level is, quite intense. So we get people on the simulators, for example, and then we'll do times tables, 8 times 8, 6 times 8, just because actually you've got no answer, because you're just totally focused on what it is that you're doing. You just can't. It's so difficult to free up any other space to get those answers in and out.